Hello and welcome to another episode of Coffee on the Couch. Now, I haven't got Christelle with me today, so it's just you and I. And I'd like to talk about ADHD and dyspraxia. We'll start with dyspraxia, and the idea of talking about this topic came up when a client of mine visited me at my home office the other day. When her and her child came up to the house, they saw some motorbikes out front, and he turned to his mum and he said, "Mum, she's got a motorbike." And the mum said, and I don't blame you for this, the mum said, um, "Well, I don't think so. Does she look like a bike chick to you? And by the way, she's got dyspraxia." That's a fair mistake. I didn't take offense, by the way, but it just made me realize just how misunderstood dyspraxia is. People know about dyslexia. I think there's a lot more awareness nowadays about what dyslexia is and how it affects people. Um, People know about ADHD, although I think there's still quite a lot of misconceptions related to ADHD. But dyspraxia is one of those things that people really don't understand, and simply not because they're ignorant, it's just that there's not even enough research out there about it. But living with dyspraxia, this is certainly very much aware of it. The thing with dyspraxia is that you do overcome quite a lot of the motor difficulties, and as an adult there's very little visible when it comes to dyspraxia. I might consider myself a little bit more clumsy than other people, but not necessarily. It is just when it comes to learning new motor skills and motor memory that it takes me a lot longer, and I do need to put in more effort. So, for example, something like line dancing, it's not something you're going to get me to do. I'll be one of those people, or the person, when the group is on this side, I'll be on that side, and when they come this way, I'll be going that way. So certain things I just keep myself out because I know I'll be the laughing stock. But when it came to learning to ride a motorbike, that was actually something quite amazing that happened in my life. Just like a person with dyslexia can learn to read, and it just takes a bit more practice, the motorbike riding was one of those things. It took me a lot to do, but one of the things with dyspraxia is that you have a lot of phobias, lots of fears, because one of the difficulties you have as a child is understanding where your body is in the space around you. That's why you bump into things so easily. That's why you appear a lot more clumsy, because you don't really have or your sense of understanding where your body is in your space, it's called proprioception, is delayed, and it develops later than with most other children. So things like a fear of heights, claustrophobia, there's a lot of phobias that actually come with dyspraxia. So I've lived my whole life having so much fear, trying to hide it, obviously, just like we do, masking things. Masking comes, you have masking in just every disorder. Everybody wants to appear better than they are and want to hide these kind of difficulties. But I really, especially fear of heights, but fear of speed and fear of just so many things. So to overcome this, I have really, really pushed myself to the limit when I learned to ride a motorbike. And it was one of the best decisions I have made. I was very much afraid of motorbikes, and people who know me and who knew me back then, maybe like 20 years ago, would not have dreamt of me ever riding a motorbike, just because I was so scared of everything, and because I was just so, rules are everything, because rules keep you safe. And I completely stepped out of my comfort zone. It took me several attempts. It didn't come easily, and it took me several attempts to actually do my license. And I remember the very first time I got onto a three-wheel scooter. My husband said, just have a go. And I would just like, got it. And I went forward on the grass. And I turned around to him. I said, how do I turn this thing? Now thinking back about it, I just really laugh at myself. And I think, what on earth? You turn it like a bicycle. That's actually what he said. You turn it like a bicycle. But my brain just couldn't make sense of it at the moment. And instead of pulling the throttle, pulling the brake, I was turning the throttle. So it just, these kind of things that comes with dyspraxia, that just, I think it's entertaining for other people, but it is something that is a bit of a problem when you're experiencing it yourself. But learning to ride the motorbike properly have just really pushed me to overcome that. And it didn't just help me to overcome my fear of riding motorcycle, it helped me to understand my body in space a lot better. Especially over the years, practicing filtering through traffic and things, you really just become a bit more aware of the space and what you can and can't do on that motorbike. But also just building confidence in so many areas. But it's not just the motor difficulties that are affected. My reading as a child was very poor, and it's one of the reasons why I actually went for an assessment in the first place. When my daughter got diagnosed with dyslexia, I thought maybe I had dyslexia, because even as an adult, when I read aloud, my reading is very poor. When I read silently, it's not a problem. I can read really complicated stuff and I really understand it, and I don't have a problem with it. I have a good comprehension. But reading aloud, I sound like somebody with severe dyslexia. But the difference is, with dyslexia, the reading problem stems from a phonological problem, so difficulty processing language and the written words. Whereas the reason why I have reading difficulties is a muscle problem. It's a coordination problem. So my brain goes way too fast for my mouth muscles, my tongue muscles, to actually keep up with what's going on in my brain. And then I lag behind and I blah, blah, just, the words come out all wrong. And even in my speech, when I'm tired or nervous, I have a stammer. Not very noticeable, but I do have it, and I'm very much aware of it. So it's these little things with dyspraxia that follows you into your adulthood. But the worst of them all is time management. That is something that I find extremely frustrating, extremely embarrassing. I would consider that my biggest fault, and it's not something that I want to have. I really, really, really dislike the fact that I have no sense of time, and I am so dependent on my watch telling me how much time have actually passed, to be on time, to get ready for things. That is something I find really frustrating, because I know it's not anything to do with my intellect or laziness. I'm completely not a lazy person or a sloppy person. And it's not that I disrespect people by not being on time. It's a real frustration. It's that inner sense of time that just does not exist. But over the years, you learn coping strategies, and thank you so much for technology, because it just makes your life so much better. And it's such a useful time for actually, having those reminders. Even a watch that buzz if I can't use my phone, to just remind me, oh yeah, okay, you've got to get ready, you've got to do this thing, you've got to do that thing. So I think from dyspraxia, that is something I find the most difficult. I have a bad posture as well. I think it's improved so much over the years, but as a child, I remember my grandma spending hours trying to get me to just walk up straight and sit up straight, and even getting me books balanced on my head and walking in a straight line. And walking in heels, oh dearie me, I still don't do heels. If it doesn't have a nice big wide heel, you won't get me in heels. But then that to me didn't quite explain all my difficulties. There were a few things that I knew, especially as a specific learning difficulty specialist. I knew that, yes, I agree with my diagnosis of dyspraxia, but there are certain things that I can't really explain in terms of dyspraxia. I also had this complete inner restlessness. As I've explained, my mind races at a million miles an hour. I just have these thoughts, and I haven't even finished the one thought, and then the next thought is coming up, and it's just like ideas, and it's just like spilling out, and it just couldn't stop thinking about this thing, thinking about that thing. It's actually exhausting the rate that my brain thinks up ideas. It can be wonderful, but it can also be quite exhausting. It doesn't quite explain the fact that as a child I was a complete daydreamer, because I had all these ideas and plans and things that's just going on in my mind. It didn't quite explain the wandering mind, not being able to stay focused on things. But then again, it also didn't explain the hyperfocus that I can get. I can be so intensely focused on something that interests me, by the way, that I completely forget about everything else around me. And it also didn't quite explain the fact that when I go and sit down in the evening to relax, I just can't. I sit there and I feel guilty, and I've got to stay busy. I've got to, my hands, I have to keep my hands busy. I've got to do something. So I went for a screening for ADHD a couple of weeks ago, which confirmed my suspicion that I have got ADHD as well. Now, as I mentioned before, ADHD look very different in women than in boys. Well, I actually don't know if I've mentioned it. The working memory problem. I think that's a problem with both. It's not just the one thing. It's an overlapping problem, dyspraxia and ADHD. And yeah, I think the preoccupation as well. It's still hard to unravel and know exactly where the dyspraxia ends and the ADHD begins. And going off topic as well, like I'm doing now again. But I had this assessment because I just wanted to get a better understanding. And also, as I'm getting older, hormones very much affect ADHD. And your symptoms become a lot more prominent. And then it's very helpful to know if you need to go on to any kind of hormone therapies or anything. It's quite useful to know if you have ADHD. And that's why I've pursued the screening, and why I wanted to know. And all these things that I've just mentioned as things that could not be explained by the dyspraxia are definitely things that links with ADHD. An interesting thing that happened during this screening was when the assessor had to unravel and unpick the social skills difficulties, because again, they look very similar, and to be honest, dyspraxia, ADHD and ASD, autism, have very similar difficulties. There are social skills difficulties within all three of them. But the reason behind it is different. Just like the reason behind reading difficulties in a person with dyspraxia is different from a person with dyslexia, the social skills difficulties, the reasons behind it are different for all three: dyspraxia, ADHD and autism. With dyspraxia, the social skill problems are usually stemming from, I think you usually have the wrong end of the stick. You know, it affects your sense of humor, not your sense of humor, but it makes you vulnerable to those people who actually enjoy seeing how you get the wrong end of the stick. When they make a joke and you don't realize that they're actually making a joke, and you see it's serious, you want to correct them. um, Whereas with ADHD, your thoughts are so all over the place that you may appear that you're not really listening, or sometimes your mind is really wandering, and not because you're not interested in the person, it's just because you're really tired or something, and your mind is in a different place and you didn't actually listen what the person says. And that could appear as being disinterested. It could be like you're not really connecting with the person, and it can cause some social difficulties as well. And then with ADHD, you go away from a social situation wondering the whole time, oh my goodness, I hope I didn't really offend that person. What did I do? What did I think? Why did I behave like that? And then you saw something in a person's body language and you think, oh my goodness, did I do something wrong? Did I say something wrong? Did I, just get things wrong again? But with ASD, you go into the social situation with anxiety, and you also have this inner dialogue about, is my body language correct? Am I sitting? Do I look interested enough? What do I do with my hands? And then it causes a real anxiety, but it causes that anxiety beforehand. Whereas with ADHD, the anxiety pretty much comes afterwards. So I found that really helpful, having that discussion with the assessor and understanding how to pick these three apart. Yeah, and I would really recommend, if it is something that you're struggling with as well, to just go for a screening. You can't lose anything from going to a screening, but it afterwards is really helpful. It helps you to understand yourself a bit better. It explains a lot more things, and now I can look at it and I can see how my ADHD and my dyspraxia can actually help balance each other out. So I do have this sense of adventure. I love being in the outdoors, and I do, just want to do adventurous things. But then my dyspraxia holds me back, and prevents me, I think, from just stumbling into certain circumstances. I've found that frustrating sometimes, but in hindsight, I think it's helped to keep me safe, because, in our family, I've got a husband with ADHD as well, and it's really caused us some big heartaches with big serious accidents that's come because of that impulsivity of the ADHD. But I think having dyspraxia alongside ADHD just counterbalance a little bit of that impulsivity. I'm not saying it's not there, but I think it counterbalances it a little bit, and it's quite helpful. So yeah, I know I've talked a lot about myself just now, but I hope that talking about these difficulties can help you to understand yourself. Maybe you've seen some similarities and it can just confirm some of your suspicions. And then if you do have a suspicion, don't be afraid of going for a screening and getting that peace of mind. It just really helps to understand yourself better, have more compassion with your own difficulties, so that you don't beat yourself up about these things. As I said, time management is a huge thing for me, but because I really understand where it comes from now, it's not going to affect my mental health because of these difficulties. I understand it and I can have compassion with myself. So if you like this video, please give us a thumbs up or subscribe if you want to hear more. We have lots of discussions. Usually I'm not on my own and it's more interesting with somebody else. But yeah, until next time. Thank you. Bye.